реальности. Вон, смотри, переброс скал. Есть переброс скал. Блинкер на 10. Скорость 12. На войска пока ничего не вижу. Нормально. 23:42
Benvenuti, questa è la puntata numero 0 di Radio Happenings dallo studio di Neu Radio qui al nuovo forno del pane presso il Museo Mambo di Bologna. Radio Happenings è un nuovo format, una sorta di ibrido tra trasmissione radiofonica e happening, dedicato all'arte, al pensiero critica, ideata e condotta da Katia Golovko, qui al mio fianco, e dal sottoscritto Cristian Adamo. In questi mesi di distanze fisiche forzate in un mondo iperconnesso, gli incontri virtuali mediati dal video, dalle connessioni informatiche sono diventate un po' all'ordine del giorno. Noi abbiamo deciso di dare un tocco fisico a questa virtualità forzata. Per questo Radio Happenings si svolgono fisicamente qui nello studio di Neu Radio al Mambo, con un ospite in connessione remota e un ospite in presenza qui in studio con noi. E chissà, magari un giorno potremo avere anche un po' di pubblico in studio, che sarebbe un po' l'idea principale di Radio Happenings. Abbiamo pensato a Radio Happenings come un'opportunità unica, perché uno studio radiofonico in un museo è una cosa abbastanza inedita. L'abbiamo pensata un pochino come un nuovo medium un nuovo strumento che permetta al museo di uscire da se stesso tramite la radio, e di una radio che diventi in qualche modo un organo vivente all'interno dell'organismo museo. Quest'oggi abbiamo il piacere di avere qui con noi, in collegamento da Mosca, Arseny Zhilyaev, e nello studio qui di Neu Radio, nel nuovo forno del pane, il direttore artistico del Mambo, Lorenzo Balbi. Parleremo di cosmismo russo, di nuove concezioni di museo, della pratica artistica di Zhilyaev e del lavoro curatoriale di Lorenzo Balbi, che in passato, tra le altre cose, ha già avuto modo di collaborare con lo stesso Zhilyaev. La sonorizzazione di questa puntata è stata curata da Max Zani. Passo ora la parola a Katia per dare il via a questa puntata numero 0.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of Radio Happenings from the Neu Radio studio located inside the Nuovo Forno del Pane at the Mambo Museum in Bologna. Radio Happenings is a new hybrid format between radio broadcast and happening dedicated to art and critical thinking, conceived and conducted by me, Katia Golovko, and Cristian Adamo, my co-host. Obviously, the current situation has put some limitations on the performative and collective dimension of this initiative, but we are still very happy to be able to connect with all our listeners and the Mambo Museum. We are very pleased to have here with us today Arseny Zhilyaev in connection from Moscow and Lorenzo Balbi, artistic director of Mambo. So, first of all, I would like to make a short introduction of our guests. Arseny Zhilyaev is an artist based between Moscow and Venice. His projects examine the legacy of Soviet museology and museum in the philosophy of Russian cosmism, using the exhibition as a medium. Artists' works have been shown at the Manifesto 13 in Marseille this year, in several international biennales, at Ljubljana Triennale, as well as exhibitions all over the world. Besides his artistic work, he publishes articles in eFlux Journal, Idea, Coltaru, and others. He is an editor of an anthology, Avant-Garde Museology, published by eFlux, University of Minnesota Press, and VAC Press. And also, he's a co-founder of Moscow-based Center for Experimental Museology. Lorenzo Balbi has been the artistic director of Mambo, Museum of Modern Art in Bologna since 2017. After his studies in conservation of cultural heritage at the Ca' Foscari University of Venice, he specialized in contemporary art at the University of Turin. His texts and articles have been published in various magazines. For 4 years, he was artistic director at the Verso Arte Contemporanea Gallery in Turin, a space dedicated to research on emerging artists from Asia. Between 2006 and 2017, he taught Curating Methodology in Campo, a course for curators at the Sandrettore Rebaudengo Foundation in Turin, where he was also involved in the organization and development of exhibition projects. He was the curator in charge of the Residence for Young Curators project between 2015 and 2017. Since 2018, he took over the artistic direction of Art City Bologna, a series of exhibitions organized in the occasion of Arte Fiera. He is also professor at DAMS at the University of Bologna, and he is also a member of the board of directors of AMACI, Association of Italian Contemporary Art Museums, and coordination of the Italian Contemporary Art Forum. Today's conversation will be about Arseny's artistic practice, exploring Soviet museology and the philosophy of Russian Cosmism, about Lorenzo's experience as curator and artistic director of museum. And for us, it's stimulating to assist to the discussion of an artist and a curator and a museum director, starting from the ideas of Russian Cosmism, and in particular, the idea of museum. The discussion around museums is very timely right now. Much artistic and social research is focused on critical rethinking of museum spaces. For this reason, it's particularly interesting for us to bring together Lorenzo and his experience of creating Nuovo Forno del Pane at Mambo, and Arseny, a great connoisseur of Soviet museological heritage. The soundscape of today's conversation is curated by Massimiliano Zani. So, to start our discussion, I would like to ask a very general question to Arseny. Could you tell us about Russian Cosmism, when and how it was born, its main ideas and main thinkers?
First of all, colleagues, hello, and hello to all who listen us now. Thank you for inviting me, and at the beginning I just want to say that I'm a big fan of radio and radio format in general. I did several projects using radio as a special medium, and while I listening to you, I understood that there is one very funny example of using radio for intergalactic communication in the heritage of Russian Cosmism. There is one also, Valerian Muravyev, who used to work within Central Institute of Labor after the revolution, and he proposed a theory of universal mathematics that should allow us to be masters of time, to be possible to turn time upside down and provide technology for victory over death and the resurrection. So besides his theoretical thinking, he wanted to write one novel. He didn't do this, but there is a short explanation of its plan, and this novel was dedicated to revolution, but revolution not human revolution, but insect revolution, revolution of ants, because his surname in Russian, Muravyev, related to ant. It's like Muravey in Russian, ant. And this was about these ants as revolutionaries, and they use special radio devices for intergalactic communication and establishing intergalactic communist union. So it's a really interesting example in relation to radio. I guess really it's a very suitable format for even today for sending signals to outer space, for instance. And speaking about general frame for Cosmism, I'd like to shortly describe the ideas of Nikolai Fyodorov, the main figure of this circle. I don't know whether it's possible to speak about philosophical theory when we speak about cosmism. Maybe it's something in between fiction, poetry, art, practical science, and kind of weird version of philosophy appeared in Russian late 19th century and 20th century. So Fyodorov was a librarian. He spent his life in a very ascetic mode, and his main idea was quite simple. And if you understand this, you may understand the rest logic of his philosophy. He thought that our main evil of our humankind, and not even humankind, but all living beings, is death. And we need to promote immediate fight against death by all means, but through very peaceful unification. So he was he lived in the same time with Marx, for instance, and his approach in some ways comparable with Marxism, because it was very practical philosophy, and not philosophy as a kind of explanation and speculation, but philosophy that should transform our reality. But on the other hand, Fyodorov was against revolution. He thought that revolution as a kind of violent gesture could not lead us to peaceful another world. So that's why we need to promote unification of all beings under the common task. And he thought that it would be enough for this, because if Marxism would like to make a split in between society, between rich people and poor people, between different classes, which is not easy even in theory, even today, especially to understand who is a proletariat, who is intellectual worker, who is the owner of means of our production. But in case of cosmism, it was easier because the main evil was behind the scene. It was behind all beings, because death unified all types of creatures. And it shouldn't be only mystical victory. He spoke about elaborating real technology for getting victory over death. So he was against any type of utopia in this aspect, and he tried to elaborate kind of very practical, very functional way of thinking. And then, like a next step was resurrection, because he thought that definitely once upon a time we will get this technology, and 100 years ago it was not possible to imagine this, but right now we approach in this condition, at least not, maybe we cannot speak about actual eternal life in the physical world, but we could speak about possible virtual reality for, I don't know, our virtual brains, or we may speak about radical prolongation of life through medical technologies. So it's kind of up to date. But it was not enough for Fyodorov, because the first generation that will get this victory over death will get immediately debt to previous generations that spent their lives in order to give this immortality for this last generation. And he thought that ethical dilemma is very brutal. It's very traumatic. And like a next step how to deal with it, he proposed the idea of resurrection, that victory over death is not enough. We need to elaborate technology for resurrection. And again, speaking about contemporary condition, we have these ideas about cryonics, when people try to keep their bodies after their death in special freezing condition for possible future when they will be resurrected through DNA or through other elements of the body. So it's more possible than in late 19th century. And as a kind of next step, he understood that our Earth perhaps is not such a big planet. So that's why we need to think about possible conquest of outer space, or maybe not conquest, but just spreading humankind or this resurrected generation in outer space. That's why he started to think about this as well. And what is the most striking for me and the most important and the most close to art field was the idea of Fedorov about museum. He thought that in the very heart of the theory of Russian cosmism, the theory of common task is the museum, because museum works against the progress. Relation to progress in case of Fedorov wasn't unusual. In some ways, it's close to relation to progress of Walter Benjamin, who thought that revolution would be final destination of progress, that would stop it, because progress is a kind of train that goes to catastrophe. And for Fedorov, progress treated in the same way, but its final destination should be victory over death and resurrection. And museum works against it in the way that the progress existed in the 19th century, kind of very aggressive mechanism. And he thought that museum should be transformed, of course, because it was different from even current condition of museum. It was more conservative, and he think that museum should be united with scientific laboratory, for instance, and the church, because church has an intuition of immortality but doesn't have hands. And plus it should be united with a school. It should include observatory, like outer space observatory, and it could, and plus of course it should have this archive that preserves as much as possible traces of life. So it sounds quite contemporary, because I guess contemporary museums, it's not just museums, it's not just archives, it has their research units, it has their educational departments. Maybe they do not work for elaborated technology of immortality, but in some way, of course, any work of museum could be treated like this. And there is a quote from Fedorov when he speaks about archiving and exhibiting things using metaphor of resurrection. For him, when we do an exhibition, we resurrect things, which is logical in some ways. And then, even during his life, appeared several models of these resurrected museums, shaped as artistic projects. Of course, they do not pretend to be real, actual resurrected projects, but it was quite close to historical avant-garde in Russia, and the Malevich was close and influenced by Fedorov, and there is a interpretation of his black square related to cosmism. The black square is a kind of outer space vision, and very artificial vision, which is different from European and American avant-garde, which was quite natural. For instance, Pollock, who used gravity power for shaping his canvases, and Malevich did something opposite. He wanted to get victory over gravity and produce a quite artificial image of outer space. And then there was several followers, and I mentioned already this Valerian Muravyev. There was some important scientists, for instance, like Vernadsky, who proposed the idea of noosphere that is close to our interpretation of Anthropocene, because noosphere for Vernadsky was a geological period when humankind starts to play a crucial role for geological surface of Earth. But he was a very big optimist. He thinks that it's a bigger possibility and responsibility for us to transform our Earth. And of course, under current condition, it's more like a problem. Then I can mention Tsiolkovsky, who was important pioneer of rocket technology, and he proposed the first models for rockets and using rocket engines. And officially in Russia, he is treated as a kind of father or grandfather of Soviet space program and Russian space program. And Tsiolkovsky met with Fedorov in a library when Tsiolkovsky was a student, very poor student, and Fedorov tried to support him intellectually and even financially. Despite Tsiolkovsky said that he was a self-taught scholar, but of course it's not coincidence that this interest to outer space appeared in his philosophy and practical ideas. So there are a lot of things about, but the general idea of Russian cosmism, it's a technological victory over death, resurrection, and using art, science, and intuition of church for getting to this point. Colleagues?
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Neu Radio, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here today. And thank you, Katja, Christian, and Neu Radio. Thank you for inviting us for this new format. I'm happy to, as Arseny said, to be part of the experiment. And I'm happy to be here, like physically present in this space, because as you know, the museum is closed, it's closed to the public, but we are still here, we are still alive, we are still working in the museum. And so I'm happy to be here this Saturday. And thank you even for inviting me to speak with Arseny, who I met different times in the past, in Torino, in Venice, in Moscow, and in Bologna with his works 2 years ago. So thank you. It's a good occasion to see you again, even through a screen. I hope to see you again here in Bologna soon. And just to continue, I mean, you said many different interesting things about Russian cosmism and influence on your practice and on the contemporaneity. But I would like to start from coming back from the idea of museums, from Fedorov's ideas of museums you thought about. And because it's really contemporary, this idea of rethinking the role of the museum. In a way, it was theorizing that the entire planet Earth will be a museum of the humanity in the future, for the idea of Russian cosmism. And in this idea, the role of the museum is completely the sense of being, the sense of acting in the contemporaneity. And I think that with this emergence, with this crisis, a lot of museums experiment a new way of being a museum in the contemporary. So I really want to start from this, asking what you think about a possible role of the museum in the contemporary. For instance, I have to say that we are here today because we made this reflection in the past month, so we decided to quit the exhibition program for a year, for the time we want, we'll see. And to experiment a new format with the nuovo forno del pane, we have a radio inside the museum, which is a new way of communicating outside our content. But especially we divided the space in the exhibition space. Now we have 13 studios, 13 artists working on now, like here and now. So a new role of the museum, not anymore exhibiting things. You thought about the museum against the progress This is a kind of resurrection, I said, of the role of the museum, producing art and being in contact. So in a way, the aim is to produce a new community of artists, to build a new community of artists. So what do you think about this possibility for the future, and what's the role that we can construct for a museum in the future?
Thank you for this question. I guess what we have in case of Museum of Russian Cosmism, it's like ultimate final goal of development, possible development of museology. And of course, it's not like easy. It's not history is not a teleological process. But in theory, even speaking about Fedorov, in order to start to work in such radical way, first of all, we need to get social equality. We need to have, let's say, good condition for museums in general. So, in my opinion, the first step in this way should be new understanding of museums and new social condition that would allow us to speak about more radical vision. And within pandemia, maybe it's interesting that museum, as we discussed before our conversation, that museum is quite safe spaces, yeah, and it's maybe the most safest space in the earth right now, and it's not logical that museums are mainly closed because it could regulate its audience, it could provide a good condition, etc., etc. So I absolutely agree with you that museum, it's not only a space where we preserve objects and traces of life, but the space of life and the space where we may produce this life and produce creativity. So I guess it's very cosmist idea, you know, to give space to artists.
We're a kind of cosmist museum now, so an example.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, it's interesting that our reality pushes us to be more respectful. Another angle of this story, you know, recently I read in a newspaper about some worries of British museums and workers of British museums who said that under quarantine with all these pandemic problems, we absolutely shift understanding of our audience, because before we were afraid of bad visitors that could damage our objects by mistake somehow. But right now we are very lonely because we are empty. We don't have these angry, dangerous visitors, but we have other types of visitors. We have insects, again, not ants, but other types of insects. And they start to approach art and objects in absolutely another way. And this article entitled Resorts, Museums as Resorts in Great Britain, because they treat it as a resource for insects in other species. So it's interesting how museums change interpretation of life, and how art could be treated in a very different way. So it's a kind of, again, spaces where could life a new type of treatment to art originated, even within such difficult conditions. And finally, I guess that there are many interpretations of the origin of cosmism in general. To be honest, the very term appeared only in 70s as kind of explanation for several thinkers, and it was just a small footnote in the Soviet philosophical encyclopedia. However, cosmism as a word appeared at the beginning of 20th century. But for instance, Anton Vidokle, with whom we collaborate a lot on the topic, his idea about the origin of cosmism was an explanation through fear and through possible dangerous clash between different planets, because shortly before cosmism appearance, there was a rumor that Earth is approaching to asteroid that could destroy the life, and through this fear of this complete destruction appeared new theories that tried to speculate about possible preserving life and etc., etc. So maybe we are within our quarantine situation, we could get something good from it, especially for museums and for art, some new visions of what we can do, and new programs for museums, etc., etc. So I hope that in case of Mambo it would be profitable finally.
Thank you, actually. And last time we met, I want to go in the direction of like explaining what you are doing, and maybe to speak about some of your work, your recent works. But going there, I want to ask you another question, because last time we met, it was in the occasion of this exhibition, which was called "It's Okay to Change Your Mind," organized in Villa delle Rose here in Bologna 2 years ago, at the beginning of 2018. And the occasion was because I was nominated artistic director here, but of course there was already an exhibition program, and the exhibition program for the winter 2017 was had at the center an exhibition of Russian avant-garde, so Malevich and Lisitsky and Chagall and Repin and I mean all works coming from the State Museum of St. Petersburg, but a very big show called Revolucja. And of course it was not in my plan, of course, so I found it when I arrived. And I mean, answering at this, so kind of provoked by this exhibition, I said, why don't we start with an exhibition of the so-called second avant-garde, no? The new avant-garde, so an exhibition about young, or not super young, but contemporary Russian artists. So it was the occasion to have a collaboration with the Gazprom Foundation, and to work with another curator, Suad Garayeva-Maleki, and to put together a lot of works of the new generation of Russian artists. But in the other hand, it was a good combination, because we had the occasion to think about what's the heritage of Russian avant-garde for the new generation of Russian artists. And in this idea, you were telling about this kind of approach to the history of art. So what's the lesson from the avant-garde for an artist who is working now and here in this crazy new scene? So
you know, we are having a big discussion about avant-garde even immediately right now, because just a week ago an important exhibition was opened in Moscow called Vkhutemas, because Vkhutemas, it was the main institute of art, like a big art school, organized by avant-garde artists for avant-garde artists. So it was very experimental, even in the field of pedagogy. And mainly the heritage of this project was hidden and forgotten, as well as avant-garde in general. And right now, trying to work with this it's not easy in many ways because the very term Russian avant-garde appeared more or less in or became like more recognizable only in 1980s. Before that, it was strictly forbidden in Russia and not very popular abroad. However, the word avant-garde appeared, I guess, in French culture in the middle of 19th century, and Italian futurists and Marinetti used this word avant-garde, that we are kind of avant-garde of artists that approaching new realities and new society in the future, etc., etc. But as far as I understand, they do not use it as a kind of umbrella term for different modernistic groups. And the same was in Russia. The term was used, but mainly as a kind of metaphor for like aggression against the past, but not for all movements and not all the time. And the new appearance of the word perhaps happened in the 50s because of Clement Greenberg, avant-garde and kitsch, and then several theories appeared, but they didn't touch a lot of Russian avant-garde because it was closed. However, some works by Malevich were shown in MoMA, important exhibition about Cubism by Alfred Barr, so that was some traces, but not the very term. And it was very interesting that actually these traces of Russian avant-garde were more important for European or American culture, but not important for Russian culture. And speaking about, for instance, the Moscow Conceptual School, that perhaps the most recognizable, the most important art movement from the second part of 20th century in the Soviet Union, or at least the most popular not in Russia but in the world, they were not big fans of avant-garde. They thought that avant-garde was very totalitarian. Avant-garde artists were very aggressive, etc., etc. And they were close to John Cage, for instance. Cage and Flaxus, artists who were more open to reality and less aggressive. So they were fans of these models, not real Russian avant-garde models. But on the other hand, it wasn't possible to explore the heritage. There was one important collector, Kostaki. He was a diplomat, and he started to collect pieces of Russian avant-garde artists, and he had enormous collection. I guess today it would cost hundreds of $millions. Absolutely, it's absolutely crazy. And he somehow he sent partly this collection to museums, but partly he found a way how to move it to Greece. He was from Greece. And it was the first appearance of big collection of Russian avant-garde, and he promoted it within the Soviet underground and promoted abroad. And the term appeared after Kostaki's efforts. So even today in contemporary Russia, when we speak about avant-garde, first image that we have in mind, and it was a problem for our academy, it was interpretation of Boris Groys from the book Gesamtkunstwerk Stalin, where he wrote that avant-garde finally led to Stalin, and Stalin was like a big avant-garde artist. And it was very provocative, of course. It was kind of speculation, but of course based on some sort of relation to realities that avant-garde, of course, had. And and Groys is quite popular, and the problem is that many people in Russia knows only this provocative explanation, which is already something, which is good, because it's like one of the biggest and the most important figure in Russian philosophy of second part of 20th century. But on the other hand, there are a lot of hidden stories. And in my particular case, I work with avant-garde museology, which is again not about like avant-garde artists, but about some sort of margins, deviations. And in my opinion, again, returning to museums, what artists try to do with museums, if we speak about avant-garde artists in Russia, they were very they behaved in a typical artistic way. You know, what real artists want to do with museum. Artists wants to be included into all exhibitions, want to collect it as much as possible, and ideally, artists wants to take control over all museum institutions. So you as a curator should know this very well. But yeah. And they try to do this because we have a museum of painting culture, actually artisan space. But it was quite innovative. It was perhaps one of the first example of a museum of modern art in the world. But it was about promoting a very small group of people and about promoting very special way of treating museum. But then appeared some different explanation of the role of museums that was close to conceptual school that appeared in 50 years later, or that was close to institutional critique, and was close to Marxist understanding of the role of the museum. And in my interpretation, this second wave of post-revolutionary avant-garde, especially within museums, were more radical than just black square. I guess curators usually, like contemporary curators, in their activity could be more radical than the most radical artists of the past, because curator is a kind of it's like super artist in some ways. So I would say that of course avant-garde is a still big provocation for Russian artists, but only through understanding that avant-garde is popular abroad as a kind of, you know, legitimized term in Europe, in Italy, in US, and there are a lot of, you know, hidden small things that we need to keep in mind. But what is about Italian version? I can imagine that in case of Italian futurist movement could be the same problems, no?
Of course, with the same problem, yeah. But I mean, continuing this reflection, and because I was asking about your work, so probably I mean, I know that you have done this huge series of work called the Museum of Proletarian Culture, and two pieces of this. Of this series were shown at the Villa delle Rose 2 years ago. So maybe, because I mean, it's very into the reflection you were making now. So maybe we can continue, and maybe Katya can help me to show a picture of it. Oh, what do you think? Yeah, because I think it's interesting, no, in this moment to see your work and from where this series started, and something about these particular works. This is a room of Villa delle Rose where your works are together with some sculpture in the middle of the room by Anatoly Osmolovsky.
Yes,
But
yes.
you are in good company.
Absolutely, yes.
So maybe you can tell us something about, in particular, that.
So, meanwhile, here we have 3 tapestries with Tsiolkovsky.
Yeah, this is the other work, but I was telling about this.
Yeah. So it's more about cosmism, and this more related to what we are discussing now about historical avant-garde. And this project appeared in the frame of this investigation, this research on avant-garde museology, when I understood that perhaps in Moscow in the middle of 2000, the most radical examples of art installations were not actual installation by artists, but were museums of revolutions or former museums of revolution, because they did very interesting exhibitions, kind of collages from different artistic media with very critical approach, etc., etc. So it was like a good piece from Documenta, and not comparable to very, to be honest, provincial, unfortunately, works in Moscow at that time. Right now, Moscow is different because we have a lot of museums, we have a lot of efforts in the field, so the situation is better. And unfortunately, our museums of revolution already transformed into something else. So we lost this layer of works, let's say. And I decided to appropriate somehow this methodology of museums of revolution, and in particular methodology of Alexei Fedorov-Davidov, who was a kind of curator of sociological school in the main museum of Russia, Tretьяков Gallery. And he was the head of department dedicated to what we can imagine as a kind of modern art. And he tried to find a way how to, on one hand, show the art of previous epochs, but on the other hand, try to critically contextualize them, not to show them within the white cube, as we usually have now. Because when we have a white cube display, we don't have real understanding of meaning of work. And, there are a lot of criticality against white cube, etc., etc., and possible caption, and there is a tension between autonomy of art and this more pedagogical version of art, and we need to include this explanation. So Fedorov-Davidov tried to contextualize art of previous epochs within typical interiors of their owners, and through this he provided to audience tools for understanding that those types of art appeared not for like temples, not for white cubes, because white cubes even didn't exist at that time, but anyway, museums was very, comparable with in their status with current condition. So he tried to critically contextualize it and include a lot of things that were not included before. For instance, art by peasants, art of workers, advertisement, etc., etc. So things that appeared in the field of curatorial work only with Harald Zeeman, I guess, when he included in his Documenta special section dedicated to propaganda and advertisement. But it was late 90s and early 30s, and what I want to do is to recreate, to make kind of reenactment of his approach, of his, he called it complex Marxist exhibitions, but with a new material. So the idea was that a visitor come to an exhibition in a distant future that exists in new social condition after the revolution, and museums try to rewrite the history of folk art and proletarian art in a new way. And the whole project was a collection of different examples from different decades and different epochs of possible work by workers, by not professional artists. And here we have one example from imaginary character, Ruben Beloglazov, who used to work in 1960s. And what he did, he used old-fashioned Soviet furniture for recreating slogans of propaganda using fonts from Russian constructivism. And thus we have kind of mix in between abstraction, because it's not easily even to people who know Russian to understand what is this, but actually it's a kind of slogans, kind of poetry. And we have in Russian we can read Mir наш идеал, which is in English the world is our ideal. But shaping like that, you have this like a rebus, like abstraction, but you can feel, you can understand this. You can understand this through this logic of constructivism, constructivist forms. But the idea was, that it's kind of freezing of avant-garde impulse in design, in folk art, in things like that. So I guess it was typical for Russia and for Soviet Union of that time, because we didn't have pop art, for instance, because we didn't have things, we didn't have good furniture and Coca-Cola. We have mainly texts, and people who wanted to produce something particular, they were forced to produce it by their own. So we have big movement of comparable with DIY movement, and there are a lot of examples of self-made furniture, for instance. So it was a kind of work with this folk tradition of producing this type of DIY furniture, but at the same time in connection, in relation to avant-garde, in relation to constructivism and to propaganda.
If I may, I would like to interrupt your conversation and get back to the idea of museum, and the idea of museum as a place where immortality can be achieved. And we can, if thinking from this point of view, so the zoological museum, archaeological museum, or ethnographic museums can be such places. But also, at the same time, I think looking at this from the other point of view, and I would like to quote the movie by Alain René and Chris Marker, The Statues Also Die, where they say, when men die, they enter into history. When statues die, they enter art. This botany of death is what we call culture. So the question maybe for the last 5 minutes that we have, how do you see the relationship between museums and immortality and death? How it can be solved in your artistic or curatorial practice?
Oh, it's a crazy question for 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's impossible.
It's impossible, but I guess that the length of our human life is almost impossible for elaborating technology that could provide us eternal life. So it's the same question. I don't know how to answer, but I feel that museum has this intuition. Fedorov was right. Museum has something really that lead us to something unknown, something that's really much bigger than us. And museological technologies, they really could be treated as a kind of model, as a kind of prototype for future models of resurrection. And museological ethics, I guess, is quite important for what is going on right now. And the same could be said about Cosmism, because one of the main interesting things from Cosmism that they thought about ethical conclusions that we should produce from immortality, for instance. Because there are a lot of questions arise. Who should be resurrected? Who should live forever? As you can imagine, the first person that would get it would be our presidents and our dictators, perhaps, and our directors of corporations. And we have in Russia right now a special huge department with billions and trillions of dollars that should work on DNA and getting immortality, and it was headed by Putin's daughter. So it was very logical. But museums have another position. Museums have this another ethics, and this is important.
But I mean, it's even more difficult when you have 1 minute now. Sorry, Katya. But of course, it depends on your idea of immortality. I really think that I agree about what Arseny was saying, and I really think that it's not about objects or it's not about projects, but it's more about formats. So this is the really immortal thing that we can do. It's not about something of preserving stuff but making sense. And I mean, doing new formats this is the real immortal thing that we can do and working in museum.
And
Agree.
Yes. I mean, of course, it's a very long thing, and conversation could start from here. But I really think that we now, with this pandemic, we really have the occasion to think about this, because we were clearly in a spiral of production, no? Even in the museum field. So, I mean, exhibition, being the first to have Russians, the contemporary artist show, be the first to have a Zhilyaev solo show in our space, be the first of having the more shiny, lightful installation of this kind of artists. But now we had to stop, and we had to really think about what would be a good and format for the future. So this is a really immortal thing, probably.
Thank you.
yeah, I agree, and it could be like a perfect ending of our meeting for this first episode, or episode 0 of Radio Happenings. I would like to thank you, Arseny Zhilyaev, to be here from Moscow or from Dacha. And it's a pleasure to have with us Lorenzo Balbi, that we discover is a perfect radio host.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, of course, to the crew who support our show. Is the camera guys, Francesco Guidicini, Dario Zanasi, and Carlotta Chiodi, we know better as Totta at Neu Radio. And of course, thank you to NeuRadio and to Mambo to make it this possible. And yes, see you next time. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
До свидания.
До свидания.
So it was interesting, I guess. Yeah. So thank you. Ciao, ciao. Take care.